Previously on Five Nights at Freddy's Season 1. Charlie, Emily, and her friends spent a treacherous night in Freddy Fazbear's, ultimately confirming that the animatronics were haunted by the 4 children who disappeared 8 years earlier. Marla was disappointed by her meeting with former police chief Van Shelley, but she managed to gain the alliance of Jay Dunn, who was relieved of duty by Chief Clay Burke due to his snooping around Freddy's history. Jessica switched sides from Marla to Charlie, noting that Marla holds too closely to her foregone conclusions about Henry Emily being the true killer. Now intent on finding the truth behind the missing children incident, Jessica pointed Charlie in the direction of the short-lived second Freddy's location. At the same time, the documents Charlie stole from Freddy's, Clay Burke, and Phil Brooks have revealed the existence of a third restaurant, the original Afton and Emily collaboration, nearly forgotten by the public, where CiCi Afton met his grisly fate 10 years earlier. We open on asphalt, swooping up across the parking lot to reveal Freddy Fazbear's. But the eagle-eyed will notice something's different. The parking lot is freshly paved and packed full of cars, and the building is free of graffiti. The sheet metal Freddy still looms over the door, but he's waving more enthusiastically. The sign reads Freddy's Pizzeria instead of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. We truck in through the window to find a clean, bustling mascot restaurant full of arcade games, claw machines, and sundry other retro kids activities. One part of the restaurant even has a mini carousel with a pig, an elephant, a hippo, and an alligator instead of horses. The curtain opens to reveal Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica in their original state, clean and free of holes. Chica's beak is bigger, and Bonnie is more blue than purple. Bonnie and Freddy are more square and have buttons on their chests. They look more like Fredbear or the Showbiz Pizza animatronics, with looser skin and rubbery faces. These are the forms of the animatronics we saw in the beginning of episode 1. The animatronics start singing and dancing, considerably more stilted than we've seen them. We angle on a corner of the main room labeled Kids Cove, where the checkered pizzeria wall print fades into an abstract mural. Foxy is almost in one piece, covered in red fur with 2 feet, no eye patch, and no pants, though he does have his hook hand. His voice box regurgitates pre-recorded kid-friendly sentences, as the younger kids play with the blocks and plushies that live in a treasure chest at Foxy's feet. We see inside the office, which is much cleaner than we're used to seeing it. In place of the 2 button-operated industrial doors is a single, unremarkable office door. A man sits at the desk with his back to us. The door opens and another guy pokes his head in, a real Patrick Bateman type of guy in horn-rimmed glasses and a tie, hair slicked back. He holds a lit cigar like it's his 11th finger. Yes, this is a children's restaurant, but hey, we're barely out of the 70s. We may recognize this guy as Scott Chipper, who introduced us to Freddy's way back in the cold open of episode 1. Chipper tells the desk man that he's needed in the arcade. The desk guy follows him out, and we see his face. It's Henry Emily, about the same age as we've been seeing him in Charlie's flashbacks. We hold on the desk for a moment, just able to see Henry's tinkering projects and a hand-drawn blueprint of what looks like a skinny jester with a cartoon sun for a face, popping out of a giant Christmas present. Henry enters the arcade where a bunch of kids are watching a fistfight take place. A little girl we recognize as 10-year-old Charlie is fighting a little boy, even though she's wearing a dress. The boy's nose is bleeding. The other kids are cheering and jeering. Henry picks up Charlie, despite her protests, and carries her out of the room. They go into the kitchen and he sets her down. She's still agitated, but he calms her down, calling her Charlotte. He asks why she was fighting, and she says the kid was bullying Carlton. Henry says it's not like her to fight, and she says she can't just let people hurt her friends. Henry says he would expect this from Sammy or Lizzie, but he expects better from her. Charlie asks if she's just supposed to let other people get hurt, and Henry says maybe, sometimes. Henry's pager goes off, and he says that must be her mother. He makes Charlie promise not to fight anymore, and she asks if he'll make the boy apologize to Carlton, and Henry says he'll see what he can do. Henry goes back to the office, where the phone is ringing. He picks it up and is greeted by a grim-sounding man who asks to speak to Henry Emily. It's Chief Shelley of the Cawthon Police Department. There's been a bit of an incident at FREDBEAR'S. Henry asks if anyone got hurt, and Shelley says he'd better sit down for this. We cut to the inside of FREDBEAR'S Family Diner, the precursor and sister location to Freddy's Pizzeria. It's a much smaller building with a real down-homey feel to it. Picture the love child of Cracker Barrel and Showbiz Pizza Place. There's no pizza here and definitely no arcade machines. Fredbear's exists in the space between local and cheap. We truck unsteadily through the small dining area where the booths are stationary but the tables and chairs have all been shoved aside, plates of pancakes and eggs smashed on the walls, orange juice and coffee mixing into a bloody mess on the carpet. A trail of actual blood runs down the length of the floor, converging with the puddles of maple syrup. We start to pan up as we truck, and we start to see feet moving around, finally revealed to be police officers and EMTs. We briefly see a boy, probably 13, sitting against the wall, his eyes wide in shock bordering on catatonia. In his hands is a cheap plastic mask of a red fox. We move on, panning up to finally reveal the small stage at the head of the building. First we see a furry, yellow, rubber-faced rabbit animatronic holding a banjo, and then we see his companion, the yellow bear with the purple top hat and bow tie, Fredbear. His rubbery jaw and facial hair are fully soaked in blood, still dripping onto his chest. We truck back, slowly, as the police and EMTs fan out around the diner, putting up crime scene tape. We settle halfway through the area, still angled on the yellow bear. It's a full-color, moving copy of the photograph Charlie Emily will one day find at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Roll opening titles. Today's animation depicts only the yellow rabbit and yellow bear standing on a stage in an 8-bit diner, performing for 4 children, each of whom wears a mask of the 4 Freddy's characters. Between the stage and the audience, a smaller boy is lying on his side, crying heavily. This episode's title is Chapter 6, FREDBEAR'S Family Diner. Morning of Day 5, aka November 12th, 1993. In Anna Maria's house, Anna Maria, Jimmy, and Otto Sims are sitting at the table drinking coffee when Hannah enters. She and Otto greet each other civilly. There's no love lost between those two. Hannah asks if they're ready, and Anna Maria says the memorial doesn't start for hours. They can take a minute to wake up first. Hannah shakes her head in disgust, pointing out that today is all about remembering an innocent little boy who died in a horrible accident. The others aren't sure how to react to this. Otto goes to the sink to rinse out his cup, asking Hannah how her mother's doing. Hannah says, fine, why? Otto says it's called being polite. Anna Maria remembers something and tells Hannah she has a question from Jessica. Where did the name Fritz come from? Hannah is taken aback, but tells her it was her stepfather's idea. He was born and raised in Germany, and Fritz was some relative of his. Since her stepfather paid all her medical bills when Fritz was born, she figured she would let him have first pick of names. Anna Maria says Jessica mentioned someone in town named Fritz Smith, and she was wondering if they were connected. Fritz Smith? Hannah repeats, surprised. She's obviously confused, but she says she never knew a Fritz Smith. Who was he? Anna Maria says Jessica just said he was some guy who works at Freddy's. Otto speaks up, drawing attention away from Hannah's sudden consternation. Otto asks if Jessica's got caught up in some Nancy Drew crap with her old friends, and Anna Maria says there must have been an unspoken reason for her to suddenly show up in Hurricane. Otto apologizes in advance if John has anything to do with this. His son is too smart and too empathetic for his own good, and he's never going to stop poking his nose in where it doesn't belong. Ever since CiCi... Yeah, Jimmy says. Jessica, too. Same song, different verse. Actually, Jason says, Cassie called him yesterday to say she saw Jessica. Or at least she thinks it was Jessica. She's not exactly known for spending time with her niece, not since her father-in-law became a vegetable. Harriet invited her over with Marla Alderman, and they were definitely doing some kind of Nancy Drew crap. Jimmy is annoyed that their sister told Jason instead of him, and expresses worry about Jessica and Marla. Hannah says they should probably go visit the Shelleys one of these days, but Jimmy and Jason are hesitant. Jimmy says the way Cassie and Caleb smothered Van in his own fantasies creeps him out. It's like The Wizard of Oz. We're all mad here. Otto tells him that's from Alice in Wonderland. Charlie and Jessica drive through the desert, eating from the pile of snack foods they acquired for the hour-ish drive. Jessica is saying that Marla found a bunch of her dad's documents after he disappeared, and she thinks they can implicate Fazbear Entertainment in the MCI, but she'll never do anything with them because she's scared of blowing her cover. Jessica thinks the main reason Marla called her here was because she's in law school. Charlie asks, hesitantly, if the documents possibly point to Scott Chipper being framed. Jessica asks why. Charlie prompts her to grab Phil's binder from the back seat and says it's basically a decade's worth of complaints about her father. Memos from employees calling him unhinged, angry, all kinds of things. And the worst part is, Charlie can't even refute them. All her memories of Henry are positive, but there aren't enough of them for a clear picture. Jessica says anger issues don't make someone capable of murder, and Charlie says no, but maybe close. She says that the folder revealed it was Henry's testimony that got Chipper arrested 2 years after the disappearances. An eyewitness testimony with nothing else to go on. And Chipper was killed before anyone could dispute it. If William Afton or anyone else was the real bunny killer, they could have convinced Henry to testify against Chipper to throw off attention. Jessica reacts in surprise at one memo submitted in November 1987 by a Jeremy Fitzgerald. Jessica thinks she knows a Fitzgerald family in Hurricane, but she can't remember who they are. Charlie asks if Marla thinks Henry was the killer, promising Jessica she won't be mad. Jessica says yes, Marla is convinced Henry's the killer, which is why she doesn't want to involve Charlie. That, and she thinks Charlie's immature and impulsive. What? That's not a bad thing. It's better than being stuffy. Charlie sighs and says the anti-Henry memos kept her up all night, but she's not about to assume her father was the killer. But she's not going to deny evidence either, if there is any. Jessica says that's why she's here with Charlie instead of with Marla. Marla decided a long time ago that Henry was the killer based on circumstantial evidence, and now she stretches the facts to fit that belief. Charlie says she thinks Marla is hiding secrets about Charlie's childhood, traumatic things she doesn't remember, and asks if Jessica knows anything about this. Jessica looks out the window and says no, clearly lying. At the town hall, everything is set up for the memorial, including several photos of CiCi Afton, a small, white, 8-year-old boy with brown hair, never smiling, posted up on the stage. A number of people are milling about, moving food to the food table or setting up votive candles. Betty is walking around nervously, talking on a cordless phone. She sees Jen entering with a pot of something and greets her gratefully, saying she needs a favor. Jen says she's here to help. Betty asks if she can go to her house and see if Abby's there. She says that Phil ran away with Abby last night, but now he's saying he can't find her. Jen is surprised, but agrees to help. Betty hangs up the phone and puts Jen's dish on the food table. She passes Hannah and Jason, sitting together and not touching. Jason notes that Phil Brooks hasn't arrived yet, wondering where he is. Hannah asks how should she know? Jason says he just figured they were incommunicado. At the Hurricane Motel, the super with the scarred arm is again called to the front desk by the sound of knocking. 3 men in suits stand there, looking friendly. The super opens the window, and the lead man says he'd like to rent a room, speaking broken English in a thick German accent. The super eyes them suspiciously and asks how many nights. The Germans glance at each other and say, Zweihnachten? Yeah, Zweihnachten, 2 nights should do it. The super asks if they want just 1 room, and they laugh, the lead guy saying, no. When they travel in style. They want 3 rooms, and they want a recommendation for the finest restaurant in the area. Opening his binder, the super says they're shit out of luck. Das König der Burger burned down last year. Jen rings the doorbell at the Burks house. No one answers. She tries the knob. It's locked. She glances back and forth, and pulls out a bobby pin and picks the lock. She opens the door to find Carlton standing there, wet and naked except for a towel. He says he was in the shower. Jen says his mom sent her to find Abby, and Carlton says she's not here. Jen says she's missing. Carlton tells her to come in while he puts on some clothes. Charlie and Jessica drive around the half-dead town of Cawthon. Charlie says, tell me again what you and Marla were doing here yesterday? Jessica says they were visiting her great-uncle, who Marla thought might know about the second Freddy's location, but it turned out to be a dead end. Great-Uncle Van has totally lost it, and all he was doing was saying random stuff about Dorothy and the rabbit hole, mixing up The Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland for some reason. Jessica asks if anything looks familiar, and Charlie says maybe, but she doesn't remember anything about the second Freddy's, if her dad was even involved. She asks why it shut down, and Jessica says Marla found out about an event called the Bite of 87, which took place right before all of the police quit and the missing kids were reclassified as dead. Jessica points out a house as they pass, the house of her cousins, the Aftons. Charlie clocks the purple car in the driveway and says she's pretty sure it belongs to Mike Schmidt, the new Freddy's night guard. Charlie thinks he might actually be Michael Afton, but she's not sure by sight. Maybe Jessica should meet him and let her know. Jessica says she hasn't even seen Michael since he stopped living with Carlton at age 18, and no one's seen his father since even before that. In the town hall, a good number of Hurricane's small populace have gathered in folding chairs to watch the various speeches. First up is Mayor Monahan, putting on a facade of humor and talking about William and Clara Afton. He says he didn't quite understand them when they first moved here, and he definitely didn't approve of their business model, but hey, he's not in charge of housing and development. He finally gets around to mentioning CiCi, except he calls him BB. Marla enters, pushing Dottie in her wheelchair. John is alone in his house, sitting at the table, spinning a corkscrew around in a circle. He briefly flashes into a memory of the bite of '83. CiCi crying, kids jeering, Fredbear biting down hard on bone and muscle. John looks directly into the camera and says, "I wish I could see you." The phone rings and John lingers looking at the camera, then goes to answer the phone. We pick up and walk over to him in handheld, and he glances at the camera as he speaks, greeting the caller as Mike. John says, "You did? Are you sure?" He peeks outside through the lime green curtains. "Yeah, tonight." He glances at the clock on the stove, which reads 1:06. It's not quite time yet. In the Burke house, the phone rings and Jen picks it up. It's Betty. Betty asks Jen if she found Abby, and she says no, but Carlton is going to help her look. Carlton comes out of his room wearing baggy pants and a band t-shirt, and takes the phone from Jen. He asks where Dad is, and Betty says he's out looking for Abby. If he can't find her soon, he'll call out an Andrew alert. Carlton asks if Uncle Phil is there. Betty says he better not be. If he's not out looking for his missing daughter, she's going to murder him. Carlton hands the phone back to Jen, ducks into his room, and comes out wielding a baseball bat. He says there's only two places Abby would want to be, her dad's house or Freddy's. The bat is applicable either way. Carlton leaves the room, then pokes his head back in to ask Jen if she's coming. She hangs up the phone and follows him. Back in the town hall, Betty hangs up the phone just as Phil appears. Betty asks if he found Abby, and Phil says he thought Clay was looking for her. Betty stares at him in disbelief, then walks away. In Cawthon, Charlie and Jessica park and get out of the car in an empty lot with only the footprint foundation of a building and a single electrical box in the middle. Charlie asks if Jessica's sure, and Jessica grimly says that Marla said she saw this lot yesterday, and she thought it might have been the second Freddy's, but she wasn't totally sure. It looks like the building is completely gone. But it was a long shot coming here anyways, since the building was actually a different restaurant after Freddy's was dead on arrival. They step over the short wall and wander the contours of what was once the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's. Charlie asks if this place was supposed to use the same animatronics, and Jessica says no. According to her cousin Harriet, they had a whole new high-tech band created by William Afton. Not by Henry? Charlie asks. Jessica says she thinks Henry had left the company by then, probably after Ella left with the young Charlie. Charlie asks how employees could have been complaining about him years after he left, and Jessica agrees it's suspicious. Maybe Henry was framed for framing Chipper. Charlie sits down against the electrical box, frustrated, and Jessica joins her. Charlie says everything is so damn confusing with her father and the company, the missing kids, the ghosts. Hold on. Jessica says. Does Charlie really think the animatronics are possessed? Charlie says she knows how Marla feels about the paranormal aspect of it all, but she's also seen some stuff. Jessica tells Charlie that Harriet believes that their cousin Fritz is trapped inside the animatronics, but Marla refuses to believe that Jeremy is. Jessica hasn't given it much thought, but one night after drinking too much, she ended up coming clean to her goth roommate, which was a serious misstep, because now she won't stop talking about it. Charlie notices movement in the cracked foundation floor. A little rabbit, yellowish, skittering under the weeds towards the low foundation wall. It disappears behind the elbow of a heavy yellow pipe mounted in the floor and the wall. Charlie stands up and walks over to the pipe. "Hey Jessica," she says. "What do you get when you cross Dorothy and Alice?" Jessica looks confused. "You follow a rabbit down the yellow brick road," Charlie says, and steps over the wall. In the town hall, Phil gets up on stage and thanks everyone for coming. On behalf of Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated, he would like to extend his deepest sympathies for those who knew CiCi Afton. It's been a rough 10 years, but somehow they've all managed to pull through. He would like to apologize on behalf of CEO Jacob Murray, who couldn't be here today, and former CEO William Afton, who couldn't stand the emotional burden of coming back to Utah. Michael Afton, the brother of the deceased, also sends his regards and says it's totally his fault that CiCi died and he's still really broken up about it. Shattered, really. Someone in the congregation snorts derisively, and Phil tries to ignore it, saying that he may as well take this opportunity to give them some bad news. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza will be temporarily closing its doors next month, while the company goes through some restructuring. In the crowd, Granny Foster cries out in anger, saying they're all deifying CiCi and ignoring the many, many other deaths Freddy's has caused. Phil tells her to direct her complaints to their fax number. Granny Foster says CiCi's death was the best thing that could have happened to the company. It allowed them to get away with other murders as long as they were less theatrical. Jay Dunn stands up, taking Granny Foster's lead, and says they actually were theatrical. The MCI kids were kidnapped by a yellow bunny. Betty snaps at him, and Jay says, "Sorry, Mrs. Burke, but it's time everyone knew." Phil snaps at Betty. He said no one was allowed to mention the Fredbear's characters. Otto Sims, at the back of the room with the Appletons, points out that they can't ignore them, they're here because Fredbear killed someone. Phil says it was an accident, and anyways, it was committed by a character who is no longer a part of the Freddy Fazbear's brand. Hannah says, yeah, and who caused the accident? Otto's son. Otto yells at her, and Anna Maria scolds him for yelling at her sister-in-law. Jimmy Appleton stands up and says, no, Otto's right. Everyone's blamed the kids for too long. It was Emily and Afton who created those monsters, and the town that failed to run Freddy's out on a rail. Mayor Monahan asks his assistant what the hell is going on, and she says she thinks the townfolk are becoming self-aware. Mayor Monahan leaves the room quickly. Maggie Myers stands up and says, what about her husband? He went missing at Freddy's a week ago and there's been no attempt to look for him. Betty tells her Clay is trying. Maggie says sorry, she knows that's her husband, but Clay is the police and the police have always done Fazbear's bidding. Jay says that's right. Everyone in the Hurricane and Cawthon police force were forced out of their jobs in 1987. Everyone except Clay. Phil says not that the missing children incident even happened, but if it did, it was in 1985. Jay says yeah, but 1987 was when the kids were reclassified as dead instead of missing. There's a general outcry at this. Anne adds to the fray, yelling that her dad probably has something to do with it. We pan over to reveal Lynn sitting next to her, giving her a what the hell look. Betty yells at Jay under the fray. How could he do this to Clay? Wow, that rhyming was totally unintentional. Jay says Clay took away his badge. He's not a cop anymore. Now he's a concerned citizen. Maggie makes a grab for Betty, and Betty pushes her off. Jay grabs Betty's arm and says they'd better get out of here. As they leave, Betty makes eye contact with Phil, who's disappearing behind the stage curtain. Jogging through abandoned backyards, more dirt than grass, Charlie follows the half-submerged yellow pipe, stopping every few meters to scrape it off with her shoe and make sure it's the same pipe. Jessica follows her, trying to ask where she's going. Past the final house in the cluster, Charlie pushes through a grove of trees, not bothering to check that the pipe's still there, and emerges on the other side in another parking lot, this one with its building somewhat intact. The building is long, low, ringed with shattered windows that look into a brown and beige interior. The siding is fake log, and as Charlie approaches, we see the faded sign over the door. Under years of graffiti and weathering, it says, FREDBEAR'S Family Diner. Charlie steps forward, mind blown, and Jessica catches up. Oh, she says. Oh man. Come on, Charlie says, sprinting towards the front door. Carlton and Jen arrive at Freddy's and knock on the front door. No one answers. There's no cars in the driveway either. They go around to the back door and knock, yelling for Abby. No response. Jen asks if Carlton really thinks she's in there. Carlton says Abby came from her dad's house, so the only other place she would be is here. Jen asks why only Freddy's. Carlton is unsure how to phrase this, but he says something happens to Abby when she's at Uncle Phil's. It's weird, but her bedroom over there is just unsettling. It's like she becomes a different person, but like still a kid, and she talks a lot about Freddy's, which she never does when she's at the Burks. Carlton says he can't explain it, but he has a feeling. Jen says, okay, she doesn't think her brother would mind if she broke a window, so she can go get her glass breaking tool from the car. Carlton says don't bother. He knows a secret way in. Charlie and Jessica approach the front door of FREDBEAR'S Family Diner. Charlie pulls out a glassbreaker seatbelt cutter and says Aunt Jen may not have adopted her, but she made sure to remotely train her to be prepared for everything. Jessica says, yeah, she got that impression. Charlie rears up and brings the tool down on the glass, but it just keeps going and she stumbles as her whole arm passes through. She rights herself, and they simultaneously realize that the 2 plates of glass in the door were already missing. You know, I thought it looked a little too clean, Charlie points out, crawling through the doorframe. Charlie and Jessica take in the stained panel floor, the filthy fake wood walls, the booths and bar, and occasional broken chair that make up the earthly remains of FREDBEAR'S Family Diner. There's a giant hole in the ceiling, and it's clear the interior has been damaged by weather. On top of that, the walls and floor seem to have considerable fire damage. "The diner," Charlie murmurs. "Of course." She steps up to the bar, peering into the kitchen, and for a brief moment we see a smiling couple in vibrant colors. Henry Emily and his wife, Ella, both covered in flour, Ella sticking a sausage link in Henry's mouth. Charlie wipes the dust off the bar and sees, in the dim light of the broken windows, the FREDBEAR'S Family Diner logo. The same font as Showbiz Pizza, but with cartoons of the yellow bear and rabbit. "Freddy and Bonnie," Jessica says, coming up behind her. "No," Charlie murmurs. "They had different names. Fredbear and..." She can't remember. She moves on, crossing the moldy floor, kicking old trash out of the way to reveal a trail of blood spots. She sees a bigger splatter of blood and kicks away the trash to reveal the remains of a chalk outline. "Oh my god," Jessica says. "Is that CiCi?" "No," Charlie says. "That's an adult, or..." They look closer, and it seems for all the world like the chalk outline was drawn around one of the animatronics. Charlie walks to the stage, where there are 2 empty platforms with electrical hookups. On the wall behind the stage, the outline of 2 animatronics have been spray painted like shadows, one with big bunny ears. "They were here first," Charlie says. "FREDBEAR'S Family Diner. This is where CiCi died." She's not surprised that she was missing all memories of the diner, since her memories have such big holes in them, but doesn't everyone in town think CiCi died at Freddy's? Jessica says she doesn't know, but she's pretty sure Freddy's originally opened in 1983. Maybe it was created to cover the memory of Fredbear's and CiCi. And the company must have done their best to erase the diner from the public memory. Everything except demolishing this building for some reason. Charlie notes more faded blood on the stage, and we see a few sudden, startling flashes of Fredbear in his full yellow glory, leering down at us. Then with a horrible crunching sound, blood appears on his muzzle. Charlie steps back, astounded, saying she thinks she remembers, but she couldn't. She wasn't there. She looks over at the wall and sees the boy from the cold open, holding his Foxy mask, sitting there in shock. She looks at the other wall and sees 2 more kids, the same age, wearing blue Bonnie and brown Freddy masks of the same cheap plastic. Through the editing techniques we've established, those who are paying attention will notice that these are flashbacks, not ghosts. "There's something else," Charlie says, unsure of herself. She walks towards a door in the back, as if supernaturally drawn to it. "Something else?" Jessica calls after her. "There's probably a lot else. Like, did Uncle Billy not know about spring cleaning?" "Spring cleaning," Charlie murmurs. "Spring bunny. Spring Bonnie." She looks back at Jessica. "There's someone else. I swear, I can feel them in my memories. They should be here. They should be there. I feel like I betrayed someone. I forgot them." A ghost appears outside the closet door, a 4th child wearing a plastic Chica mask. Charlie gestures for Jessica to stay back as she opens the door and finds a closet full of junk, with a surprisingly clear path to the back. Charlie tries the light, but of course it doesn't work. She shuffles forward and jumps back when something snaps loudly at her foot, a dark object flying into the air. She crouches down, curious, and is just able to make out a piece of broken metal, hinged in the middle and held shut with a spring. She holds it up in the light of the doorway and says, "Spring locks," frowning in thought, wondering where that word came from. Then we hear the same word, spoken this time by her father. We see a brief flashback close-up on Henry, sitting somewhere outside, as he explains that spring locks are not to be played with. He's building them to hold back hundreds of pounds of machinery, and that machinery could easily crush a child if the spring locks were tripped. We pan down to reveal young Charlie, who asks if they're dangerous for grown-ups too. Henry says only if they're not careful, but she has nothing to worry about, because her old man is always careful. In the present, Charlie sees something moving in the back of the closet and looks up to see a mirror in which she can just barely make out her reflection. Behind her in the mirror is the kid in the Chica mask. "You forgot me," he says. Charlie stands up, uncertain, but suddenly a large, dark shape seems to move out of the mirror and into reality. A human-sized yellow rabbit. Charlie jumps back as the monster steps towards her. This isn't the animatronic, formerly of Fredbear's Family Diner. This is an aging cloth suit, a remnant of the darker days of children's entertainment, its skin a filthy yellow pattern, its limbs busting at the seams. Its face is curled into a twisted grin, and its purple eyes are borderline demonic, not made any less creepy by the effeminate eyelashes and bent whiskers. The yellow rabbit costume holds a finger to its mouth in a shushing motion, and suddenly transforms into the yellow rabbit animatronic, transporting us back in time to Henry's workshop. Henry is inside the yellow rabbit animatronic, which at this point is known as Spring Bonnie. Henry tests out his fluidity of movement as he explains that, thanks to the spring lock system, Bonnie and Fredbear can be both animatronic and costume. We see a little Charlie watching him, and she asks again if it's dangerous for adults. Henry asks if she remembers what he said before, and an off-screen voice answers, "Our old man is always careful." The blonde boy we've been seeing all over steps out from behind Charlie, and they stand together. "That's right," Henry says. "Gold star, Sammy." Back in the present, Charlie stands up a little straighter, blinks, and realizes the yellow rabbit is gone. She stumbles out of the closet, disoriented. She glances at a booth nearby and sees a brief flash of little Charlie and the blonde boy, Sammy. She looks over to the stage and sees little Charlie and Sammy playing around Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. She stumbles to the bar and leans on it, seeing little Charlie and Sammy hiding behind, giggling conspiratorially. Jessica comes out from the kitchen and Charlie mutters that she forgot. Somehow, she forgot her brother. Sammy. She had a brother. She knows this, but he was gone somehow, and now he's come back to her. Jessica asks if she's sure, more testing than concerned, and Charlie says yes. She can see him. She's been seeing him this whole time. She looks up and freezes. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie are back on stage, and the blood is back on Fredbear. Charlie stands up straight as she sees the 4 children with the 4 masks. Visions, not flashbacks. As Charlie watches, they take their masks off. Foxy is the boy from the cold open. Freddy is John at 13. Bonnie is a girl with curly red blonde hair and green eyes. And Chica is Sammy. Charlie starts hyperventilating, and Jessica wraps her arms around her head, comforting her. Jessica says it's time to leave. Charlie hesitates as the Foxy kid appears behind the bar, pointing to something near the floor. Charlie escapes Jessica and runs around the bar, searching the back, the Foxy kid vanishing. When Jessica rounds the bar, Charlie is crouched down, and to Jessica's surprise, she's smiling. She gestures silently to a sentence written on the back of the bar in spray paint. Michael A. was here. The I in Michael is dotted with a circle. We focus on the underwhelming ball pit in the darkened Freddy's. Suddenly, someone falls from the ceiling and into the pile of plastic balls. When he resurfaces, we see that it's Carlton. Carlton climbs out of the ball pit and reassures Jen, who's crouched in the ceiling, visible through an open grate. Jen steels herself, then drops through into the ball pit, somehow landing on her feet. She asks if that was really easier as a kid than just sneaking past the payment counter. Carlton says probably not, but it was a lot more fun. Jen turns on a pen light and they creep through Freddy's, both calling for Abby. They reach the end of the hall and are startled by Freddy, who's casually walking past. The animatronic bear glowers at them, his eyebrows coming down. This probably won't come as a surprise at this point, but Jen is hit by a Henry-themed flashback. Henry is soldering something in his garage, hunched over a desk and wearing a welding mask when Jen enters. Henry hardly gives her a cursory glance as he asks her to pass him a tool. Jen asks if he's not going to question her presence when she lives halfway across the country. Henry says she's either here or she isn't. Her presence is a binary to him and proximity is irrelevant. Jen hands him the tool and watches him work. Finally, she says if some part of him cares, she came here when she heard Ella had left. Henry suggests that Jen is trying to make sure Ella doesn't take half his stuff, and Jen says, "No, asshole. She's here for him, to support her brother." Henry finally turns around and lifts up his mask, and we see that his hair and beard have gone mostly gray. He looks tired and old. He says he doesn't need any support. She says he needs to be around human beings for a change. Henry returns to his work and says his creations have never deserted him like humans have. Jen says Charlie and Sammy didn't leave him, not by choice. Henry says no, he left them a long time ago. Back in the present, Jen and Carlton watch Freddy walk away. Charlie and Jessica sit in the Cawthon McDonald's eating fries. Charlie is somberly explaining that she's been seeing Sammy all over, in her dreams and in real life, and he sometimes appeared with Fredbear. She realizes now he was trying to lead her to the diner so she would remember him. He also led her to finding the stolen documents, so he must just want them to tear down Freddy's. It's his unfinished business, like ghosts are supposed to have. Jessica asks why Sammy would want to destroy his father's life's work. Charlie says, "You tell me," and accusatorily asks Jessica if she knew about Sammy. Jessica squirms for a second, but promises she did not know anything about Charlie having a brother. They agree that whatever happened to Sammy must have been why Ella took Charlie away, and maybe even why Charlie's memories are wonky. What if Sammy's death was so traumatic that Charlie repressed all memories of him and the diner? Charlie asks if there's any chance Sammy was one of the 4 MCI kids, and Jessica says no. She knows Susie's family, and Gabriel was from Cawthon, but she met his parents once. Charlie zones out, watching someone absolutely slathering their burger with ketchup and mustard. Charlie interrupts Jessica and starts talking about the very real possibility of the animatronics being possessed. What if CiCi possessed Fredbear? And what if William Afton killed those 4 kids to see if they would possess the Freddy's animatronics? Maybe some twisted experiment to try to bring his son back to life. That could be what happened to Sammy. Afton killed him to test his possession theory, and he chose Sammy because he was one of the kids who helped kill CiCi. Jessica points out that Afton didn't kill the other 3 bullies, and Charlie says that's because 2 of them were his own children. And with John, well, maybe Afton never found out who he was. They were wearing masks after all. And now maybe Afton's trying to finish what he started, using Michael to draw Charlie back to Hurricane. Hell, maybe John and Michael are working with him, trying to bury the last vestiges of Henry Emily. Jessica says no. She never knew Michael very well, and she hasn't seen him in years, but he's still her cousin. She knows he wouldn't try to get Charlie killed. Charlie tells her that she was finally willing to accept her father's possible guilt, and Jessica says, yeah, but maybe she's not as strong as Charlie. Phil sneaks out the back of the town hall. Hannah follows and catches up, asking where he's going. Phil says he knew this was a terrible idea, but the board insisted. Now the townsfolk are out for blood. Hannah reminds him that he didn't have anything to do with the missing kids. It was all Scott Chipper and probably Clay Burke. Why doesn't he just get Jacob Murray to defend him? Annoyed and stressed, Phil tells her there is no Jacob Murray. There never was. William Afton is still in charge. It's all been William Afton all along. Jacob Murray is just one of the many people he made up to hide behind. And now William Afton is coming here, and Phil needs to get out or something really bad is gonna happen. Hannah says, wait, William Afton made up fictional employees? Phil says, yeah, all CEOs do it. It's called a no-show job. Hannah asks if Fritz Smith was made up too. Phil realizes the significance of the question, and Hannah seems thrown off by her own thought process. It's just such an uncommon name, she says. No, Phil says. Fritz Smith was a real guy, definitely. He remembers him. He thinks, when Fritz Appleton went missing, Fritz Smith was surprised to find out there was another Fritz in Hurricane. And, Hannah asks, Fritz Smith also happened to have the same last name as her stepfather, the man who named her Fritz? Phil says Smith isn't exactly an uncommon name, and before she can push him further, he says he really has to run and gets in his car. Hannah turns around to see Clay approaching. He asks if that's Phil driving away, and Hannah says yes. Clay asks if Abby was with him, and she says no. Clay growls to himself that he's never seen a more irresponsible parent, then heads towards the building. Inside, the congregation is all shouting about Freddy's and their dark history, talking over one another. Marla is sitting silently beside Dottie, clearly biting her tongue and refusing to engage. Dottie touches Marla's hand, to her surprise. Tell them, Dottie says. Marla's confused. Tell them, Dottie insists. Marla looks resolute and stands up, but just before she can speak, she's interrupted by a man walking past. Her father. Take your mother and get out, he tells her, his voice low. Now! With that, he's gone again, and Marla is left in shock. A minute later, Marla leaves the town hall, pushing Dottie, and notices someone lurking at the other end of the parking lot. John. She leaves Dottie in a safe spot and starts walking across the parking lot. John calls to her, asking how the memorial is going. He says he wanted to come in, but he heard there was a fight going on, and he stops when Marla raises a hand to slap him, but she doesn't commit. John asks what's wrong. Marla tells him she knows he was responsible for what happened to CiCi. John grows somber and tells her that was a long time ago, and he was just there, it wasn't his idea. Marla asks how he could have kept that from her this whole time, since he knew she was trying to collect as much information as she could. Plus, they're supposed to be in a relationship. It would have been nice to know her boyfriend murdered a child. John snaps that he didn't murder CiCi. It was Michael's bullying that led to the bite. He and the others were just following his lead. And he kind of figured Marla already knew since she mentioned John being friends with Sammy. She asks if he's told Charlie about Sammy or his connection to CiCi, and he says no. Just like Marla, he's trying to keep Charlie away from information that could hurt her. Marla says that's a lie. She thought he and Charlie had started hooking up the moment she arrived, but now she realizes it's worse than cheating. He's using her for some Freddy's adjacent scheme, probably some plan to get himself closure regardless of what happens to her. John says that's not it at all. Marla says save it. She'd been trying to keep Charlie at an arm's length to protect her investigation, but now she realizes she should have kept Charlie close to protect her from John. Marla starts walking away, and John asks if she's breaking up with him. Marla says he made that choice on his own. Carlton and Jen walk around the empty Freddy's, narrowly avoiding Bonnie as he trundles harmlessly down the hall. Carlton asks Jen how they can walk around on their own, and Jen says Henry never fully explained it to her. She was never sure if he even knew himself, or if he just stumbled across some spark of magic. Carlton asks why Henry used his abilities to build children's restaurants instead of flying cars or robot servants or something, and Jen says he didn't want his creations to be taken over by people with bad intentions. But that's somehow exactly what happened. They wander apart, looking in two different areas, and when Jen is out of earshot, Abby calls Carlton's name from somewhere nearby. Carlton calls back, trying to find her, and pauses near a brick wall. Abby calls to him again. Carlton looks around, realizing the voice is coming from behind the brick wall. To his surprise, the wall slides open. It's a false wall, a sliding door made of bricks, opening onto a pitch-black room. Carlton gapes at the open wall, and a pair of hands in purple gloves reach out, grabbing him by the ears and yanking him inside. Clay enters through the back door of the town hall and ends up backstage. He fights his way through curtains and wires, almost emerging on stage, but he stops when he sees someone at the other end. The other person emerges and we see it's Vincent Alderman, and he's carrying one of the yellow Fredbear nanny cams. Vincent walks center stage, which quiets the still noisy attendants and sets the bear on the floor, walking off stage and passing Clay. Clay tries to talk to him, but Vincent evades him. The bear begins to play a recorded message, and everyone in the crowd falls silent. "Hello, Hurricane," the bear says. For the record, his accent is American. "This is Jacob Murray, CEO of Fazbear Entertainment, Incorporated." Outside the town hall, Hannah is decompressing in her car. She opens the glove compartment and fumbles through the napkins to find a loose cigarette. She looks around for a lighter. The passenger's door opens and she addresses the newcomer, assuming it's Jason, but it's not. It's Roxy, the not madam from the not brothel from Las Vegas, and she's actually wearing real clothes for once. Hannah reacts in surprise, calling her mom. Roxy lights Hannah's cigarette, then her own. Hannah asks what she's doing here, and Roxy says she had some business in town. Hannah asks if it has to do with CiCi, and Roxy says no. She's not going to participate in Phil Brooks's insipid pandering. Hannah says about Phil. Roxy says she knows. She finally did her research. Phil's been William Afton's right-hand man for years, and he's done his fair share of cover-ups. Hannah asks how she knows, and Roxy says she has friends who can get a confession out of anyone. Hannah asks if that means what she thinks it means. Roxy tells Hannah to go with her gut. If her instinct is as wolf-like as her mother's, it won't steer her wrong. Hannah says sometimes she thinks she inherited only the bad parts of Roxy, and Roxy says it could be worse. At least she couldn't have inherited anything from her stepfather. Hannah says he wasn't that bad, at least not compared to Uncle William, or Phil. Roxy promises Hannah that no matter what mistakes she's made, she won't have to think about them for much longer. The gathered Hurricanites listen intently as the stuffed Fredbear speaks from the stage, explaining that Jacob Murray had no idea how much baggage Fazbear Entertainment was carrying when he became CEO in 1988. He thought their former CEO Scott Chipper had murdered 4 children whose bodies were never found, but the truth was much worse. The founder and de facto CEO William Afton murdered those children, and possibly others, then covered it up with the help of the Hurricane Police and Afton's lackey, Phil Brooks. Then the criminal organization that funds Fazbear Entertainment paid off the police in both Hurricane and Cawthon to decimate both forces. As the teddy bear keeps talking, the crowd becomes outraged and Clay rushes out to grab it. The crowd yells at him as he stops the recording and tells them the bear is lying. The police had nothing to do with the MCI and Scott Chipper was the killer. Someone in the crowd yells that he just admitted he knows the kids are dead. A middle-aged couple yell at Clay, demanding to know what happened to their daughter, Susie. Someone else yells above the crowd, and we see that it's Maggie Myers. She asks where her husband is. Clay ignores her and tries to argue with everyone at once. Maggie yells, louder, that Clay killed her husband, and he killed those kids too. Without warning, Maggie pulls a revolver out of her jacket and shoots Clay twice. A minute later, the crowd of assembled Hurricanites leave the town hall, somewhere between subdued and panicked. The sky has turned gray. EMTs are carrying Clay out on a stretcher as Maggie is led away in handcuffs. Marla, who was waiting for a taxi at the side of the road, pushes Dottie over to the ambulance, following the stretcher and yelling at Clay over the sound of the crowd. He's barely conscious, but he reacts visibly when Marla says she knows she was right, she knows they found the bodies, she knows Scott Chipper was framed. Clay tells her weakly that it looks like she's not alone. Hannah is still in her car, looking overwhelmed as the crowd disperses around her. Roxy is gone. The car door opens and Jason slips inside, asking if he just saw Julia across the parking lot. Hannah says yeah, she had business in town. Jason shakes his head in disbelief, saying Hannah missed quite the show. Vincent Alderman reappeared and told everyone that William Afton was behind the MCI after all. Hannah is surprised. Uncle Billy? What about Scott Chipper? Jason says it looks like he was framed. This is going to tear the town apart. He asks Hannah if William really could have killed Fritz, his own nephew, and Hannah says she doesn't think William even knew who she was, as the adult stepdaughter of his brother-in-law. It's possible he didn't even know Fritz was his relative. Jason suddenly lets out his pent-up anger and explodes at Hannah, saying Vincent confirmed that Phil was part of this from the beginning. He helped cover up their son's death. Hannah says, I know, beginning to cry. Jason berates her, reminding her that he never cared if she saw someone on the side because she never cared about him, but he suspected Phil from the beginning. Hannah says she knows, she gets it now. Phil, he made her feel things. He made her feel young again. Jason wouldn't understand, it's different for a woman, but she gets it now. She can't keep lying to herself. Freddy's allowed her son to be murdered, then tried to cover it up, and to rub salt in the wound, the man she thought she loved defiled her son's memory by using his name. Outside the motel, the sky is looking very foreboding. There's a van parked outside with an Idaho license plate. In the office, the super is again called up front by a new arrival, this one in a purplish tweed trench coat with the hood pulled up. The man wears a surgical mask. We can see his eyes, and they look pretty normal. He takes off his hood, and we can see that his hair is very neatly slicked back. The man asks for a room, and the super warily looks through his book, noting that they've had more traffic in the last week than in the prior 2 months. The trenchcoat man says maybe there's a secret convention going on. His voice is cheerful, American. The super says maybe, suspiciously, and gives the man a price. The man pulls out his wallet with his right hand, his left hand stays in his jacket pocket, and casually says he'll have to forgive him for the mask, but he always gets sick when he travels, and he's very conscious about spreading it to other people. He doesn't want to be patient zero for a pandemic. The super says it's no big deal, but shifts the window a little further closed. He hands the man his form, and the man signs his name, Lewis White. The super looks up at him, suspicious, and the man says thanks, taking the key. He walks to the door and opens it, but the super yells, "Hey!" The man turns around. The super asks if he knows him. The man says he's afraid he's never been here before. He puts up his hood and limps out. Outside the town hall, Sergio Altieri approaches Jason Appleton, who's getting out of Hannah's car, and says, "Isn't it about time someone do something about Freddy's?" Jason says, yeah, he'd say so. A couple other tough guys assemble and decide it's time to kick Phil Brooks out of town. And after that, they're gonna track down William Afton and Jacob Murray and whoever else, and maybe they're gonna break into the hospital and keep Clay Burke alive just long enough to give him what for. Then they're gonna wipe out every last trace of Freddy, Fazbear, and Henry Emily from this earth. Well, Sergio interjects, just not the Freddy's building. Don't nobody hurt the building. Dare Johnson joins them, invited by Jason. The two of them seem very close. And Sergio seems dubious, but silently lets his blue-haired brother-in-law into his posse. At the motel, Charlie approaches Lamar's room, bumping into the trio of German men. The men apologize profusely in their cheerful German accents. Charlie enters Lamar's room, surprised to find Marla there, talking to Lamar. Charlie asks if this is about John, and Marla says not everything is about John, but yeah, this is about John. He lied to her. He lied to both of them. He tried to keep them apart because he had ulterior motives that Marla still doesn't fully understand. And she's sorry she had to lie to Charlie, but she swears she was doing it to protect her. Charlie says it's okay. She knows the truth now. About her brother. Lamar is so confused. Marla asks, what's this about a brother? Charlie says her memories were totally buried, but now she knows she had a brother named Sammy who helped CiCi get killed and was later murdered, separate from the MCI. Marla nods in understanding, but doesn't seem totally convinced. Charlie says Sammy's murder is proof that her father wasn't the bunny killer, and Marla says not necessarily. She believes Sammy was murdered by someone other than the bunny killer. Occam's razor, Charlie says, and Lamar has to agree. How many murderers can there be in Hurricane? Charlie says she thinks William Afton killed Sammy in revenge for the bite of 83, then killed the 4 MCI kids because he had figured out the same thing Lamar has, that the moment Fredbear bit down on CiCi's head, the boy's spirit began possessing the animatronic. William Afton was trying to recreate the accident that killed CiCi and force the other kids to possess the 4 Freddy's animatronics. Marla doesn't even have to believe the animatronics are possessed. She just has to accept that William believed it. She just has to accept that Afton believed it. Lamar asks what they do now. Charlie says she sent Jessica to Freddy's. It's closed today, probably because of the memorial, but if Donnie happens to be there, then Jessica can get them in. They need to look for incriminating evidence without the manager or Mike there. Lamar gets his shoes on, and Charlie remembers something she meant to ask Marla. Does she know anyone in town named Fitzgerald? Marla says, yeah, duh, that's her mother's maiden name, why? Jen is still walking around the darkened Freddy's, avoiding the free-roaming animatronics and calling out for Carlton. She's startled by the sound of a phone ringing and follows it into the office, where she answers the phone, stumbling over her words as she says, Freddy Fazbear residence. It's Jessica calling for Donnie, and somehow they realize who each other are, and Jen says she's here with Carlton looking for Abby. Jessica says she's calling from a payphone and she's about to come over, and Jen can let her in. Jen says that's the problem. She tried all the doors and windows, and they're all locked from the inside. But there's a window breaker tool in her car. Jessica can grab that and set them free. Jessica says, okay, cool, and hangs up. Jen glances at the CCTVs, watching the animatronics moving around, then notices the front door opening as Donnie enters and locks it behind him. Shit, Jen says. Jay and Betty arrive at the hospital, where they're told Clay was shot in the pelvis and the ribs. He's in intensive care, and they won't be allowed to see him. Jay and Betty sit in the waiting room, and all of a sudden Betty starts hitting Jay on the arm. He gets away and she yells at him, crying, asking why the hell he thought he was so much smarter than Clay. Jay says he knows he's not smarter, but the town deserves to know the truth. Betty cries that he should have just trusted in his elders. Now Abby's missing and Clay is shot. Jay is surprised to hear that Abby's missing. Betty collapses in a chair, and Jay sits down beside her, lost in thought. After a moment, Jay stands up and leaves, looking determined. Charlie, Lamar, and Marla leave the motel room and head for the parking lot. Charlie is telling Marla that once she sees the animatronics up close, she'll believe that the children's souls inhabit them. Marla notices someone entering the motel office, Hannah Appleton. She bitterly points out that she's probably meeting Phil here, but then she pauses. She realizes Hannah was there when Clay was shot. There's no way she's just going about her day. Lamar says, yeah, and they haven't said it out loud yet, but doesn't the super pretty obviously know something about Freddy's? Charlie is annoyed to hear about something else Lamar didn't tell her, and Lamar says the super obviously doesn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to bring it up if he didn't have to. Charlie says it's about time they stop being conscientious of people's mental health. Marla asks Lamar if he really thinks the super knows something, and Lamar says definitely. Marla says she'll go talk to Hannah, and they can go on ahead. Charlie asks if she's sure, and Marla says yeah, she's needed to have this conversation for a while. But what about saying the animatronics? Marla says she'd rather not know. She knows she'll find out eventually, but if she can put it off, that would be better. Jay drives through the pouring rain in his non-police car, looking through the sparse trees, and finally comes across Phil's dirt road. He turns down it and stops when he sees several cars parked outside the trailer. He gets out and sees Sergio Altieri, Jason Appleton, Dare Johnson, and the other local hooligans gathered around out front. Phil's car is on fire, hot enough to withstand the rain. Jay asks what in the hell is going on. Jason says they've had enough of the town's complacency. Fazbear Entertainment got his son killed, along with half a dozen other kids, and they're not gonna stand for it anymore. Every time someone died, the whole town told themselves they should just ignore the problem and it would go away, but now it's time for action. Jason demands to know if Jay is a cop or a local. Jay says he's a local, through and through. Plus, he got relieved of duty, so he couldn't be a cop if he wanted to. Phil's voice calls out from the trailer, uncertainly saying he's still in here, but he's got a gun. Jason calls back that they have guns too. Phil says he has a bigger gun. Jay asks if Abby is in there with him, and Phil says, no? Sergio says, holy crap, Abby's dead! The mob starts yelling and rushing the trailer, but a shotgun rings out through the window and they all crouch in fear. Marla enters the motel office where Hannah is standing alone. Hannah looks relieved to see her and starts tearing up as she tells Marla she was right about everything. About Phil, about Freddy's. Marla says she knows. It's okay. But what is she doing here? Hannah says she's finally going to do right by Fritz. She's going to make up for her culpability. Hannah bangs on the window and the super comes out. Hannah greets the super by name, Hudson. Hudson asks if he knows Hannah. Hannah says she used to hang around the Cawthon Freddy's when he worked there. She was seeing the assistant manager. Hudson asks if this is about Freddy's, and Hannah says yes. Looking grim, Hudson leaves the desk and locks the front door. He says he doesn't know anything about anything. He had a bad experience there, but that's it. As far as he knows, the official story is true, and anyways, he signed an NDA. Hannah says she just wants to know one thing. Did he ever know an employee named Fritz Smith? Hudson says not that he remembers, but the place was only open for a week. Marla says, what about Jeremy Fitzgerald? And Hannah is surprised. Hudson says, yeah, he remembers Jeremy. He was a cool guy. Hannah asks Marla what she knows, and Marla says they found a record of an employee named Jeremy Fitzgerald, the first name of her dead brother, plus her mother's maiden name. Hannah tells her that tracks with this Fritz Smith person she found. Phil called them no-show jobs. Marla blanches at the audacity of Fazbear Entertainment using the names of their victims as pseudonyms. Hannah says it goes deeper. The CEO himself, Jacob Murray, is a no-show job, and William Afton is still in charge. Hudson asks why the hell a serial killer would use his victims' names. Isn't that kind of suspicious? Marla says yes, but that's the point. It's obvious, and it's disturbed. Because the killer doesn't just want to get away with it. He wants to flirt with getting caught. He wants to wear his victims like a mask. Hudson says he wants to remind their spirits who's boss. Marla realizes out loud that, holy shit, it really was William Afton all along. William Afton was the bunny killer, and he must have set up a house of cards of complicity to make all the clues point to Henry framing Chipper. Hannah's breath catches in her throat as Hudson peers out into the rain. He reminds her that he doesn't know anything and that he will deny anything anyone repeats, but if they're really out looking for justice, he might be able to help. He shows them the ledger, pointing out the most recent lodger's name, Lewis White. Hudson's stepfather, the drunk who told the police he saw a giant rabbit kidnapping a child, then was mysteriously killed, plus Hudson's mother's maiden name. Hannah looks petrified as they all realize the same thing. The killer is in the motel. Jessica arrives at Freddy's, soaking wet from the rain, and knocks on the door, hiding under the awning. Donnie appears and lets her in, and Jessica squeezes out her hair in the foyer. Donnie asks what she's doing here, and Jessica says she wanted to see him. He reminds her that she never called yesterday. Jessica covers by saying she thought she was supposed to call today. She asks why Freddy's is closed, and Donnie says probably because Phil is at the memorial, but he has to be here to let the night guard in. Jessica asks why he's here so early, and Donnie tells her he likes to be alone in the dark, especially here. He knows this place is filled with dark energy, and that's what he thrives on. We notice Jen peeking at them from down the hallway. Jessica takes Donnie's hand and asks if he'll tell her about that dark energy. Charlie and Lamar enter Aunt Jen's house, which is dark, and Charlie tells Lamar to use the bathroom. The last thing they want is to have to take a potty break when they're running for their lives from killer animatronics. Charlie leads Lamar upstairs, and he goes into the bathroom. Charlie immediately darts into Jen's room and emerges a moment later, going back downstairs. She heads for the front door, but stops when the phone rings. Charlie hesitates, and for a brief second, a child appears in front of her, pointing to the phone. It's the kid we saw on the playground in the hoodie and the striped shirt. He's only there for a second, but Charlie gets the hint and answers the phone. To her surprise, it's her robotics professor, Amy Treadwell. Treadwell greets Charlie cheerfully, and Charlie is totally bewildered, asking how she got this number. Amy says there's only one Emily house in Herc, and silly. She thanks Charlie for being the best and brightest student in her class, besides Lamar, of course. Oh, say hi to Lamar, by the way, he's such a sweet guy. Charlie sputters her total lack of comprehension of this situation. Amy says, thanks again for taking a chance on a kooky old scientist. I love you. Enjoy your life. What? Charlie cries. You love me? Dr. Treadwell. But the phone disconnects, and Charlie is left standing there. Lamar speaks from upstairs, apparently on his way down, and Charlie rushes out of the house, leaving the phone dangling on its cord. In the Freddy's office, Donnie sits in Mike's chair and Jessica sits on the desk. Donnie is waxing poetic about some emo stuff, and Jessica is watching the CCTVs, blocking them from Donnie's point of view. On the screens, we can see the 4 animatronics milling about the restaurant. Jessica interrupts him, asking if they really just walk around on their own. Isn't that suspicious? Donnie says, oh, yeah, of course. They wouldn't be able to do that if they weren't haunted. Jessica is surprised. Donnie says he's known all along that the animatronics are possessed by those kids who went missing. It seems kinda obvious. Scott Chipper killed them and hid their bodies in the animatronics, and now they're trapped forever in their own purgatory. Much like how Donnie feels on a daily basis, living in a dying town and being misunderstood by his peers. Jessica notices Jen on the CCTVs trying to open the front door. When she finds it locked, she does a double wave at the security camera, and Jessica slips off the desk. She asks Donnie if she can borrow his keys. She wants to step outside for a minute. Donnie says he hopes she's not going to smoke. He can't imagine such beauty being self-destructive. Jessica gets into the spirit of the thing and tells him no, she just likes watching the rain because it reminds her that eventually everything will be washed away. Donnie takes her hand and says he'll join her. She resists, saying she prefers to watch the rain alone, even though obviously she likes being around him, and she's cut off when Donnie notices Jen on the CCTV. He asks Jessica who that is, and Jessica pretends she doesn't know, but she's obviously lying. Donnie takes Mike's cattle prod and walks to the foyer, Jessica following him and trying to explain. Donnie demands an explanation from Jen, and Jessica asks where's Carlton. Carlton? Donnie repeats. Burke? What the hell is he doing here? Jen explains, trying to defuse the situation, that they're looking for Abby Brooks, and Carlton thought she might be here, but it looks like he left without telling Jen. Donnie asks how she got in, and when Jen doesn't answer, Donnie turns on Jessica. Jessica says she didn't do anything, she just got here. Donnie understands the whole situation now, and he asks if Jessica ever even liked him or if this was part of some weird conspiracy. Jessica says that's ridiculous. Donnie unlocks the door and ushers them out. Jessica tries to protest, saying she really did want to hang out with him, but Donnie won't hear it. He locks the door, leaving them out in the rain. Jessica asks Jen where Carlton is, and Jen says she has no idea. They got split up, and she couldn't find him. Jessica asks if it's possible that those things got him, and Jen dismisses her. The animatronics can't kill people. They get into Jen's car, but Jessica tells her to wait and runs back to the door. She bangs on the glass, calling for Donnie, and Donnie appears and opens it. He says it doesn't matter what she says at this point. His heart has been shattered. She only wanted to use him for his influence. She didn't care about getting to know him deeper. Jessica says he's right, and she's sorry about that. Truth is, she didn't even remember him from high school. But he seems like a really nice guy, and she thinks she knows what he's looking for. She writes a phone number on his arm and tells him to ask for Millie. Donnie says he doesn't need a consolation prize, and Jessica says Millie's not a prize. She's a kindred spirit. She understands the darkness. Jessica gets back in the car, and Jen asks what that was. Jessica says she was just doing her good deed of the day, keeping the goths in the same gene pool. As Jen drives away, she tells Jessica that she's a lot smarter than she looks. Jessica says she just hopes she's smart enough to not get trapped inside a haunted kids restaurant in her 50s. Hannah and Marla are in the motel lobby talking to Hudson. He's telling Hannah that he's not going to die so she can get revenge. Hannah says it's not revenge, it's penitence. Hudson says he's been victimized by Freddy's for years, but William Afton probably doesn't even know his name. He just happened to get unlucky with his choice of part-time job, and now he sees those animatronic bastards in his dreams. Hannah says she understands, and she's happy for him, and his parents, that he didn't meet the same fate as Fritz. Hudson says if he had any parents, they would appreciate that. Marla demands the room number from Hudson, saying it's time for this nightmare to end. Even now, her own father is executing some kind of master plan that will tear down Freddy's, and they can help him deal the final blow by ending the life of the killer himself. Hannah says, please, let her do what her Auntie Clara never could and make up for the killer who shared her bed. Literally looking the other way, Hudson passes her the master key. Hannah tells Marla to leave. Marla says no. Hannah says yes, harshly, telling Marla that this is her burden to bear. She won't let Marla throw away her life because of Hannah's mistakes. Hannah takes a deep breath and heads for the door, but Hudson stops her, saying she's gonna want this. Reaching under the desk, he pulls out a shotgun. He wipes it off with a cloth, then tells her to keep it and never come back here. Jen and Jessica enter the Emily house and find Lamar at the kitchen table. Jen asks where Charlie is, and Lamar says she left without him, probably to Freddy's. Jen reacts harshly, saying she specifically told Jessica to keep Charlie out of this shit. Didn't she promise not to let her find out the truth? Jessica says she couldn't stop Charlie. And anyways, this is about the missing kids, not Sammy. Lamar says they know who the killer was, and Charlie's out to prove it. Jen gets a glass of water and says it was William Afton, wasn't it? Jessica says that's what they think. Jen says she always thought so too, and so did Ella. Ella didn't leave Henry because of Sammy. She left because he wouldn't admit to himself that Afton was behind everything. Jen asks if they know it was Henry's testimony that put Chipper away. Jessica says they do. Jen says Chipper and Henry were equally complicit. Afton may have held the knife, but Henry and Chipper wiped off the prints. Jessica asks how Henry could have covered for the man who killed his child, and Jen tries to come up with an answer and finally says she doesn't know. Lamar asks if they're talking about Sammy, and Jen says yes. Jen asks if Charlie knows. Jessica admits that they found FREDBEAR'S Family Diner and that it brought back some of Charlie's memories. She's now convinced that she had a brother named Sammy. Jen looks confused, and Jessica says she doesn't know either, but she's just been going with it. Lamar asks what they know that Charlie doesn't. Is she wrong about having had a brother? And neither respond. Jen leans on the counter and sighs heavily, reminding Jessica about when she visited her 3 years ago to explain Charlie's condition. Jen says Jessica asked her to explain what happened and that she refused, but the truth was, she couldn't have. She has no idea. But it seemed for all the world like Henry killed himself to avoid talking about it, to avoid telling Jen the truth, and to avoid ever having to face Charlie. Jen asks if Charlie is at Freddy's, and Lamar confirms they were planning to go, but only if Jessica could let them in. Jen says it hurts her to say it, but at this point, all they can do is let Charlie figure everything out. Despite the day's events, there's no reason to think Freddy's is any more dangerous than it always has been. William Afton is far away and possibly dead. Lamar asks them about Sammy. What do they know? What was so important that Jen approached Jessica about it years earlier? Jen and Jessica share a glance, then Jen nods. Jay Dunn and one of his ex-comrades stands outside Phil's trailer. Behind them, the Hurricanites have started drinking beer and looking a lot more relaxed, huddling under umbrellas. The cop knocks on the door and asks Phil if he's in there. Still not visible, Phil says he has nowhere else to go. The cop says he can give him police protection, but he needs to come out. Jay whispers to the cop, and the cop says they also need to know where Abby is. Phil says, "You mean the little girl with the black hair and bangs?" Jay says, yeah, your daughter. Phil says he doesn't know for sure, but she might be at Freddy's. Jay kicks himself for not checking there first, tells the other cop to get Phil out of there, and heads back to his car. When Jay pulls away from the trailer, the cop knocks on the door and asks if Phil's still there. Phil says, yeah. The cop walks away and grabs a beer from one of the locals. In Jen's house, Lamar is digesting what he's been told about Charlie and Sammy. He asks if Jen really doesn't know how Charlie became the way she is, and Jen says no, she really doesn't. Henry may have explained it in his second secret will, but that's for Charlie's eyes only, and only if she figures out some of the truth on her own. Jessica asks what they think Charlie is doing, and Lamar hesitantly says she just wanted to sneak around and see if she could find any evidence of Afton's guilt. It seemed like a good plan, since she already found one folder of incriminating evidence there. Jen admits that it's taking every fiber of her being, but she's going to accept that Charlie can handle this on her own, because at the very least, they know William Afton is far away. She goes upstairs to take a shower. It's been a long day. Jessica asks Lamar what the guard's name was again, and he says Mike Schmidt. That reminds him, Fitzgerald is Marla's mother's maiden name. Jessica remembers the name Fritz Smith from the HR file on Henry. Fritz, like her dead cousin, and Smith, like Hannah's maiden name. Lamar points out that Schmidt is the German form of Smith, but there's probably no connection there. Jessica suddenly grabs his hand, eyes wide. She says that Aunt Hannah's stepfather was William Afton's brother-in-law, Rory Smith, who was born and raised in Germany. He must have changed his name from Schmidt to Smith when he moved to America, which would mean that his sister, Clara Afton, had the maiden name Schmidt. And her son, Lamar begins. Cousin Michael, Jessica confirms. So Mike Schmidt isn't Michael Afton. Mike Schmidt killed Michael Afton. Upstairs, Jen turns on the shower, then grabs a towel from her room. She pauses, then opens a small safe in her closet. She takes out a stack of papers labeled The Last Will and Testament of Henry Theodore Emily, the final chapter. She flips through until she finds a photograph stuck inside. It's a choppy black and white pic with the groovy outline labeled My Happiest Day, just like Jessica had, except the My is crossed out and Our is written in its place. The picture depicts a younger Henry, Ella, and Jen standing in front of the pre-closing Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica. At a table in front of them, looking at a massive birthday cake, are two little girls, clearly identical twins. Both of them are younger Charlie. One wears a dress and one wears overalls. They both wear pointy party hats. With the sound of a gunshot, we see a brief flash of a crumpled body, a gun slipping out of its hand. We don't see the face, but it's obviously Henry. Jen drops the papers on the floor and hurries to her side dresser. When she opens the drawer, we see her leather holster sitting inside, but the gun is gone. Jen runs out of the room, yelling for Jessica. Outside of the former Afton house in Cawthon, Charlie walks up the empty driveway, which seems incredibly long. She slips Jen's handgun out of her hoodie pocket and holds it behind her back as she reaches the door. She tries the knob and it opens, so she holds the gun in front of her and steps inside. She takes off her shoes and enters the living room barefoot. A couple lights are on, just enough to see. There's an old Freddy's pizza box on the coffee table, and the TV is on, playing Fredbear and Friends, an old Hanna-Barbera-style cartoon featuring Fredbear, Blue Bonnie, and a white wolf character. Charlie creeps around the living room and into the hallway, passing a grandfather clock. She looks to the end, where there's an old wooden high chair and two doors on either side, labeled 1 through 4. She opens another door softly, and inside she can just make out a bedroom. She turns around and just barely stifles a scream as the blonde boy appears in front of her. Charlie quietly asks if this is where he wanted her to go. The blonde boy stares at her, his form flickering between his human body and the slumped-over form of Golden Freddy. Charlie asks what she's supposed to do, and the boy says, "The silver eyes will lead you to the 4th closet. Find the twisted ones." Charlie asks what that means, but the blonde boy just points behind her. Charlie follows his finger to another door, which he opens into another dark bedroom. She turns on the light and immediately cries out and looks away. The bed is occupied by a corpse, tucked in as if asleep. Charlie sneaks a peek through watering eyes. The corpse is bald with pale, blotchy skin, similar to that of Van Shelley. Charlie turns and stumbles out of the room, where she finds herself held at gunpoint. She pauses as the gun holder tells her to lower her gun. She swallows hard and does as she's told, getting a better look at him. It's John. "I'm sorry, Charlie," he says, "but this was the only way." Mid-credit scene. It's dark out and still raining as Mike Schmidt arrives at the empty Freddy's. Donnie lets him in, then leaves. A minute later, Mike settles into the office. He checks the cameras and sees all 4 animatronics on the move, so he shuts the doors. He presses play on the Night 4 tape. It's the recording Ralph made back in the cold open of the first episode, the terrified message of a man about to die. Mike listens as Ralph is chased by the animatronics and asks the listener to
check inside those suits in the back room.
Mike repeats, back room, confused. When Ralph says,
I always wondered what was in all those empty heads.
Mike grabs his cattle prod and flashlight and opens the door. Bonnie is standing right there. Mike says, sorry, Jeremy, and hits him with the cattle prod. Bonnie collapses and he exits the office. He shines his light down the hall and sees Foxy limping towards him, so he turns and runs in the other direction. A flash of light from the aging fluorescence shows a figure standing behind Foxy, the man in the hooded trench coat. Mike wanders around cautiously and does a double take when he sees the brick wall partially open. He slides it fully open and shines his light around a small room dominated by 3 broken arcade machines. A broken animatronic sits in the corner. Mike approaches it, and we recognize Golden Freddy, the later upgrade of Fredbear with the black hat and tie. The tough yet rotting body is slumped over, head missing, worn like a Halloween costume by a dead human being. Ralph. Mike hears a groan behind him and shines the light on the floor where there's an older pink animatronic with another human head sticking out of the neck hole, Carlton, looking half conscious. The arcade machines suddenly activate, flashing one image between them, an 8-bit image of Golden Freddy's head. Mike looks closer and the screens change to the words, "It's me," then, "Behind you." Mike turns around just in time to see the hooded figure looming over him, holding a knife.